Good morning. Is PR a thing of the past? Is it time to introduce paid content into PR briefs? What has the PR world got to do to stay up to date? That's the topic of this week's episode of the Public Relations Podcast. Welcome, first of all, to Series 5.5, Episode 1 of the Public Relations Podcast. So why 5.5? Well, because this is going to be a sort of linking series between what we used to do in the past on this show and Series 6, which is going to be coming up next, which is going to have an entirely new format. So, for starters, this series, 5.5, in this I'm going to be running a series of what I think are quite thought-provoking chats I've had over the past few months that I never got the chance to run. They are probably best described as being raw and unedited chats because they are packed with insight. You'll get my thoughts on some of the individual points within them in the show newsletter if you want to head to the website and sign up to that. But as I say, they are absolutely packed with ideas if you listen really to every sentence of them. This week, I'm going to have a chat with Matt Holmes from Poem, which is a Sydney-based international PR agency, which I did the chat with him at Mumbrella CommsCon earlier this year, one of Australia's biggest PR and comms events. So it's a really good chat. And one of the things I love about Matt is the fact that he's so forward-thinking. You know, he really is thinking about where the industry's going and what's coming up next. And particularly, I mean, one of the things that I love about it is the fact that he talks about data and statistics and becoming more strategic. Anyway, that's in a second. So I'm going to run a series of those. Then we're going to have Series 6, which, as I say, it's going to be like a whole new show in effect. You know, you've given me so much great feedback about this show, and thank you so much for that. What you like about the show, what you don't like about the show. And so I'm going to be focusing in on the stuff that you really like, dropping the rest of it and focusing on what you love. So this is what we're going to do every week from Series 6 onwards. I'm going to be inviting a listener, such as you, on the show to discuss current PR moments happening in the comms world and in the news world generally at the moment, this week or maybe the week before. So we'll get some stories behind some of the incidents. We'll talk through some of the events, some of the moments that happened, what happened that was good, what happened that was bad. But then what we'll do is we'll try and look at it to see if there's a different approach that could have been taken. You know, one of the things with PR, of course, is it's constantly changing. Circumstances are constantly changing. There's always things to learn. So I want to get my guest perspective on things. How would they have perhaps tackled it differently? I'll give my own perspective on it as well and see how we would have approached it if perhaps we had the brief. And I want you to get involved in this as well. Whether you come on the show or not, I want you to then give your comment, your thoughts and your perspective as a comms worker as to how you would have approached it too, and perhaps little tweaks that you would have made. We'll also talk to those guests about campaigns that they're working on, some of the learnings that they're getting out of it, because as I say, things are constantly changing, and also running through some of the sort of questions that are being asked currently in the PR world as well. Simple things like, simple things, I say that. Things like how to reach journalists, how to reach influencers, and things like that, based on questions that you have been asking too. So we will discuss that. So if you work in an agency or you're an in-house team or you just love the comms world and you've got a lot of great experience that you feel you can share on this, then come on the show, let me know, go to the website, it's thepublicrelationspodcast.com, thepublicrelationspodcast.com, and click on the menu link at the top that says the word, I think you can probably guess this, it's the word guest. Just click on that, it's got all the details about how to appear on the show. Right, let's talk about this interview with Matt Holmes. Oh, actually, just before I do, there is one other tiny bit of news to give, and that is, if you've been listening to the show over the past couple of years, you will know that I've been talking about the project that will go with the Public Relations Podcast. That is moving on nicely, and there's now more details on that on the link on the publicrelationspodcast.com website under the link that says project up there. Right, let's talk about Matt Holmes. Really fascinating chat. As I say, I love the fact that he's really forward-thinking about the industry, what he thinks needs to happen next, some of the challenges that are going on in the comms world, and also this whole sort of merging of marketing, comms, PR, where it's going to go, what's happening next. I had a chat with him in the reception area of CommsCon, as I say, in Sydney earlier this year. So there's a little bit of background noise that you can hear because we were in a very busy reception room. I've tried to remove as much of that as possible. But let me play this interview for you, and then I'll give a few thoughts afterwards.
The main thing that I got out of your thing was the fact that a lot of agencies are still just doing things on gut reaction, how they feel, rather than how consumers feel.
Yeah.
Just tell us a bit more about how you've approached that.
I think it's twofold. I think gut reaction isn't a bad thing. It's just not very scientific. So I think, in the past, in particularly new business scenarios, when we've been challenged on how we actually apply human insights. We've had to get better at using genuine kind of consumer behaviour and psychology, and working with some brilliant strategists that have come actually from most of the ad industry, and just applied a little bit more kind of robust thinking. So we normally go about that with working with those guys who have had that experience, looking at trends within a category, looking at the kind of consumer behaviour, and I guess a little bit more rigor than arguably, I would admit, having been at some top agencies in the past that were about brand entertainment, and maybe it didn't matter as much, but there wasn't, I think PR generally has rightly probably been accused of not being quite as strategic as it should be.
I mean, the data's got so much better now, though, hasn't it? Because, I mean, this was one of the things in the past with PR, I think, is that people just sort of, oh, well, that's what people want. I mean, I was just as bad in journalism, because when we picked the news agenda, we would do it based on what we thought people wanted. And yet you look at every social media account now, and you find actually they probably did want Kylie Jenner to lead the bulletin, not the local politics.
Yeah, I think the other shift is obviously the channels that we're talking in. So one thing that I think was always a strength, and is to a certain degree, of PR, is understanding whether something is genuine news and has editorial value. So we were generally thinking probably channel first. Does it have PR value? Then you would think about the audience, and that's normally comes down to KPIs and reach. We weren't necessarily thinking consumer first. Obviously, that's completely changed in the last decade with social media and there being a two-way conversation. So that changed. I think the other thing that's probably changed for the good is that you mentioned data. For 4 or 5 years, the whole industry was talking about big data and following the data, and I think we probably got a little bit too caught up in that. I think.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think that the data's important. And maybe this is my bias as a creative rather than a strategist, wanting a little bit more, wanting a little bit more freedom. But I do feel, even when selling ideas to clients, we normally do, I mentioned, emotional and rational. So I think it's not just the emotion. You do need to have a statistic that backs up why there's a trend in market, or there's a consumption behavior changing, or a care factor. So it is both of those in tandem. And I think, as I admitted in the room then, I think even Poem's approach has changed to be a little bit more mature in the last 4 or 5 years, with that kind of rigor and changing methodology and the rhyme and reason approach that we apply that we didn't have 4 or 5 years ago.
Because it's the need to justify it now as well, isn't it? This is the problem when you've got advertising where you've got the return on investment that minute, you know what you're getting. PR has always had a PR problem in that sense.
Yeah.
So it's got to be able to quantify that more now, hasn't it?
Definitely. And I think because for the better PR agencies and the best thinkers, and the crossover, I think, between thinking, there are some brilliant creative agencies that understand now, that they can and should maybe create campaigns that don't just get eyeballs via paid. I think if there's a justification on KPIs and output, and you're talking to more C-suite clients, which is something that for 20 years, I think the PR industry has been crying out for. If you're going to do that, then I think you need to be prepared. As I mentioned just now, it's not just the CMO, it's the CFO who holds the purse strings. So showing that there's going to be some kind of reach or return, even if it's a consideration and awareness, brand metric rather than necessarily sales, because God knows the industry still hasn't nailed, the measurement. And I think now it's looking at 10 different factors, or we always put up a template of what we think are the right measures, and you have to kind of look at them all, because I don't think there's one that necessarily shifts the dial. Some influencers don't share as much at their back end as they should do. That's a challenge. Although, we're data and digitally driven nowadays, it's still very difficult sometimes to show that one piece of content in the mix, particularly if it's an integrated marketing campaign that's in market at the same time.
Yeah, which bit did which?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's still difficult to unpick. But again, I think the strength of interagency relationships and a good client that is just looking, I suppose, at a macro level. They're the ones that are like gold dust and the ones that we prefer working with, to be honest.
Are you finding, though, that CMOs and CFOs are starting to ask for similar measurements? Are they starting to come together a bit? Because you say there's kind of almost a debate about the way to measure. But are people starting to get standards within the businesses?
I mean, I've been in this market now for 12 years, so I might be out of touch when I first landed here. But we tend to work with global businesses, right? So Nestle, Tourism Australia, PlayStation, Sony, we often have to almost apply 2 different methods in reporting. So there's the local market method that we value and work to as a team, and ensure that when we're doing reviews we're on the same page of whether we're hitting markers or success. And then, to be honest, actually some of the more traditional metrics, and dare I say, the evil equivalent advertising value, still comes around just because at the moment it's a benchmark. And I guess even if it's meaningless, there's a comparison that can be made year on year, even if the methodology is wrong. So globally, there are a few kind of big brands that are still asking that from local markets, at least so they can compare apples with apples, even if the figure doesn't really mean anything.
Final question is the future of PR. Where is it going to go? You know, we have talked about AI. I know it's crystal ball looking, but what's the vibe you get of where you think it's going to go and how it's going to change as a role?
God, that's a good question. Got to work out my answers from a personal or what's going to do best by the industry.
Big picture. I mean, what do you think? You know, I mean, there's some trends sort of like the fact that PR is almost going to disappear into marketing, that PR is going to be taken over by AI. There's all kinds of different things being thrown around. So it's kind of, what's your take on it? What's your feel?
As long as there's editorial opportunities and agencies are responsible for public reputation and I guess more of a trustworthy two-way conversation with consumers. My whole presentation was about being more human and deeply human. So while I think the tools are incredible and we're having a lot of fun with them, and they may, as probably were originally designed, take a lot of maybe the research legwork or the stuff that's not so much fun and shorten those times, that should hopefully improve on the insights that we then people come together and talk about and create. I don't think
the human bit on top.
The human bit, I think that is always going to be there. The other factor is that as long as there's still editorial publications and social media, then PR professionals are going to stand out ahead of the creative industry and paid industry. Even as I said, I do think there are a lot of great suits and creatives in the industry I've worked with a lot and do continue to, that get it. But I think if you were going to task them with a PR brief from end to end, they would still struggle. And I don't know, I wouldn't know how to handle a media budget either way. But so for me, I think there might be emerging of services. Obviously, back in the day, it was a lot more integrated. It all broke up, and I think we're now getting together. I do find that the challenge of integrated campaigns and integrated agencies and thinking and brand PR thinking being baked into creative ideas is still few and far between. So even if it was a necessity or lesser evil of merging more with creative agencies so that we're all on the same page from the beginning, that might have to be the way of the future. And, there are some good PR agencies that are creating content that ends up being TVCs. There are some good creative agencies developing ideas that 100% have PR value. There's someone that judges a lot of campaigns and looking at Cannes and all the ad agencies that win it. I think the question of what is PR probably is the next thing that we need to define, because I don't think, paid is one of the key channels for us, paid, owned media. We need paid media to get a little bit of fire under content, but the thinking is as long as you get it in front of enough people or an audience that has fandom, it would then bubble up to mainstream culture. If clients don't have a paid media budget, we're relying on publishing and editorial, and obviously in Australia there's so few titles now, and the conversation often is you don't advertise with us. That's getting harder and harder.
You're not going to get in if you don't.
So
in a way, PR actually, if I'm really right, it is not the old idea of what a PR was, which was just earned media. PR is almost a mindset and a set of techniques now that adds the human element on top of whatever you're doing. Is that right?
I think it adds the trust factor and the news story, the care factor. I mean, that was the title of my talk today, because we are so savvy now at being advertised to and just ignore it. And I think, we have to try and I like to kind of start talking about storytelling but there does need to be a narrative, and there needs to be something that, thumb-stopping content or stories. And I think that's where PR professionals, I think, are better trained and have more experience than the creative and media industry. I'm kind of making it sound like it's a very competitive thing, but I guess this has always been the conversation, right? And I think in the past, being a jack of all trades in PR was kind of frowned upon. But in the last 5 or 6 years, we run a hybrid agency of people that are still great at publicity and publicists, but they know how to manage a social media contract. They know how to get the first steps of briefing in a production with a project manager. And those people are for us, the future of PR. That is a future PR professional, not just a suit, for example, in account management. So that's what we've always believed in. And there are some brilliant people. And the skills that these guys, I mean, I feel old saying this, but the skills these guys are bringing to the table from a content production perspective is phenomenal. You know, it's kind of
it
stuff.
Just shows there is no one PR, is it? It's lots of different talents.
No.
Build the overall outfit, yeah.
And another thing, I mean, we've struggled about how we describe the agency for 4 or 5 years. And I think there was a time that we're almost ashamed of kind of the word PR. Like, we don't want to be a PR agency. Like, we don't want to be pigeonholed, and we're not traditional. But I think that it probably confused clients too much. Like, for a while we called ourselves a known creative agency. It makes sense. But then I think a lot of times our main KPI, or at least 50% of it with most clients, is still earned media, editorial media. And we have some fantastic publicists, and I think we were guilty of trying to position ourselves more as a kind of big budget, creative, one-stop shop, which we're good at, but the fundamental disciplines of creating a story that people are going to care about on social and in news is what we do. So, I mean, we've simplified it and we just call ourselves a creative PR agency, and I think that's enough to know that we think we're a little bit more creative and modern than some. And there's room for all, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of good agencies that still do corporate affairs and B2B and hard media relations or government lobbying, and it's not our area of expertise. And I think one of the joys now is being a little bit more comfortable about who we are and what we do, and saying no to the wrong opportunities and saying yes to some, and attracting the right kind of clients. I think that's something that's changed maybe significantly in the last 2 or 3 years.
So that was Matt Holmes from Poem. It's literally like reading a poem, which is a Sydney-based international PR agency that works with some really big names. An absolutely fantastic chat with him. I will have another chat next week. I haven't quite decided who it's going to be yet, but I've got about 6 of these, I think, to get through before we can get to Series 6. Again, if you want to be a guest on Series 6, I need to start booking in weeks ahead, because we don't obviously know exactly what the story is going to be each week. If you want to come on and be a commentator on that and give your ideas and insights on some of the PR moments that are happening that week, then get in contact with me by going to the website, thepublicrelationspodcast.com, click on the guest button, let me know, and let's book you in for your particular week. Another episode, as I say, is Series 5.5, Episode 2 next week with another guest. I will have all the details for you in a week's time. Whatever you are up to this week, though, I hope you are having an absolutely amazing start to your week, and I hope you have enormous success, and I will speak to you in, 7 days' time.